الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين ونصلي ونسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. Now, so moving on with the muqaddimah of Sheikh Muhammad Awama. We mentioned a few points previously. He goes on, he says, وبيان آخر يتصل بمصادر كتابنا هذا ذكرت أول كلامي أهم مصادر الشارح. He says another discussion that has to do with the references or the sources of this book, which is Tadrīb al-Rāwī. ذكرت أول كلامي أهم مصادر الشارح كتاب العراقي والنكت لابن حجر والنكت الوفية والنكت للزركشي ومحاسن الإصلاح وأصله نكت أيضا لمغلطائي فهي 7 حاصلها 6 واحد منها شرح وهو شرح العراقي على ألفيته فتبقى 5 منها كلها نكت. He says in total they are around 6 works. All of them are nukat except for one which is a sharh. وأقصد من هذا التلخيص والتأكيد على أمر مهم في تقويم مصادر الترتيب وهو أن النكت يكون منها مناقشات لدقائق علمية من كاتبها مع مؤلف الأصل. فالعراقي إمام وعمل نكتا على كتاب ابن الصلاح وهو إمام، وجاء الحافظ تلميذ العراقي وهو إمام فعمل نكتا على ابن الصلاح وعلى نكت العراقي عليه فكتابه نكت على إمامين. ومثل هذا كان عمله على شرح شيخه العراقي على ألفيته. نعم. ومثل هذا كان عمله على شرح شيخه العراقي على ألفيته وذلك في النكت الوفية. وهكذا يقال في كتاب الزركشي ومغلطائي والبلقيني فهي كتب فيها تعقبات وخلاصات جهد من أئمة على أئمة. نعم. Over here he says this is a really important point, which is that when you're looking at these works, the nukat that were compiled by these أئمة, these are تعقبات. تعقبات meaning not necessarily rudud. Like a rad is maybe a very aggressive way to word these things. Any academic environment, whenever you're in a setting of academia, 100% there's going to be back and forth. Like this is why also one thing that I found is very dangerous for students is to be taught that adab dictates that you don't hold opinions. Like adab dictates that you turn your mind off, right? This is not a healthy way of looking at adab. Adab does not mean, ahbab, that you turn your mind off and like you just don't think. That's not what adab is. Okay, that's maybe, creating, like that's creating a degree of, jumud, rigidness, and dogma, which is looked down upon. Why? Because if you don't use your mind and train the mind, right, what ends up happening is that you have this amazing potential and you might have a very sharp brain and so on and so forth, but it's gone to waste. And هذا هو الذي نقص أهل العلم كثيرا. يعني this is what was a defect in a lot of, not a defect, but it resulted in a backward thinking for a lot of generations regarding ilm. Like why is our standards of ilm are decreasing instead of increasing? Why is that the case? The case, or what we see happening, is as a result from this. If you have forward thinking and each teacher is actually trying to nurture the mind of the student, not from the perspective that let me just tell him to train himself and tell him that, how dare he even think he should just turn off his mind, but rather the teacher is trying to nurture the mind so that the mind can work pro-Islam, pro-Iman, pro-the ulum shar'iyya in a kind manner geared towards the ulum shar'iyya. That is better. The ones that are always meant to be anti-Islam, they're always going to remain anti-Islam. Like, sometimes there's some students, they just have something in them. The teacher can tell that this person is going to cause fitna later on. A teacher can tell that just by listening to the questions and the way the person is thinking and so on and so forth. These individuals, they're always going to remain that, regardless of how much you try and do the tarbiyah. They're going to go out and they're going to, cause issues. You're not going to stop that or fix that. But the ones that are able to think, if you don't nurture and really, provide them with the ability that they can arrive at their fullest, potential in their brain power and whatnot, then you in a way are closing the door upon a very amazing and beautiful possibility for those students, which is to be able to understand the ulum shar'iyya in a very in-depth manner, and then also to be able to serve the deen as well, right? We need people that are geniuses to apply their genius minds towards the ulum shar'iyya. This is something which will benefit the ulum shar'iyya in the long run. And when they will apply it towards that, the ulum shar'iyya, when they want to apply their skill set towards the ulum shar'iyya and serving the ulum shar'iyya and protecting Islam in general from the threats of the people around, then you will see, Islam is going to receive all of that benefit from them. And طبعا Islam doesn't need benefit from anyone, but at the same time, the point is the deen will be served. But when you just close the mindset of the student by telling them that adab dictates that you shouldn't even hold opinions, this is where the problem arises. Adab does not dictate that the student shouldn't hold an opinion. Adab dictates that the student is taught a way to express their opinions. They're taught their place at the same time. Okay. Yes, sometimes, so don't misunderstand. There's two things here. There are some students that are ignorant, right? Like absolutely ignorant. And out of arrogance upon their ignorance, they're holding opinions. Like their ego is making them hold opinions. These people need to be put in their place. But these individuals, how are they going to be put in their place? The way to put them in their place is not by telling them that you're terrible and you're trash and you don't know anything and so on and so forth. That actually creates a rebellious nature in them. If there's a student, for example, let's say, who doesn't want to focus and he's not interested and, or he has arrogance, for example, although he's ignorant, he doesn't know what he's talking about, but he has an ego. By telling him that you're a terrible person and you're, trash and you don't know anything, by saying these things explicitly, it's only going to further him in his rebellious nature. He's only going to become more rebellious. He's not going to all of a sudden take a U-turn and be like, you know what, yeah, you're right. Because the issue over here is the ego. On the other hand, if this person was humbled through other means, through other ways, through other methods, then you would have a more better output or conclusion in the end, which is that he will come out with more respect. He will come out with more respect. And one of the greatest ways, like personally I can say this, one of the greatest ways to humble a student, because I experienced this so much on behalf of my teachers or from my teachers, is that when the teacher himself is humble, the students also become humble. Right? When the teacher himself is not acting like he's some sort of a big shot or a allama or whatever else, and he's a very down-to-earth individual, then that feeling also comes into the students. And maybe that is the secret to actually creating humble students. And maybe that is the secret to actually creating students to have adab. Whereas that the teacher himself needs to adopt those traits the most, and it will slowly come into the students. So when you look at these a'imma, these were nukat, these were ta'aqubat, these were, back and forth that were compiled by a'imma upon a'imma. And that is what increases their worth. The fact that the ones that were doing it were a'imma, and the ones that were doing it upon were a'imma, lakin ma'al adab, with adab and with respect. Now, he says, وهكذا يقال في نكت الظراف للحافظ على الأطراف للمزي فقد كان حق مؤلفها وحق القراء أن تطبع كاملة مع الأصل إذ إن هذه الفوائد هي حصيلة مناقشات ومزاحمات علمية بين الأئمة لا تتيسر لكل قارئ وباحث فلا يجوز تضييعها عليهم وكثيرا ما لا تستدعي المناسبة أن يكشف المؤلف عن هذه الفوائد وهو يؤلف كتابه تأليفا مجردا عن التنكيت والتنقيب. A lot of times, sometimes they might mention something in these nukat that just a random thought that crossed their mind. They felt, a certain way regarding a certain mas'ala and so on and so forth. So it was a random thought and they wanted to address it and elaborate on it. And so they addressed it. That happens often. But if it's written down and it's recorded, then that increases in our, just the fact that you're able to access that and you're able to enjoy the random thoughts that cross the minds of these a'imma as they were going through these works. That in of itself is a great blessing. And it should be referred to all the time. طيب. Number 9, he says, وبهذه النكات والمباحثات تتنقح العلوم. يا سلام. And that is the main فائدة of these types of مباحثات and مناقشات. إيش؟ تتنقح العلوم. Okay, the different disciplines, the sciences, they become more refined. They become more refined. And you know how in English you have, or in Urdu you say chalni, which is in Arabic we say mankhal. Okay, like if you have flour or different, let's say like wheat or flour, and then you filter it, right? Now, if you use only one filter, that will attain a lot, but it might not be the best. Use different types of filters and make sure that you keep filtering until you get the most fine flour and everything else is removed from it, all of the dirt or the excess that is not from it. So likewise with the ulum, when you have multiple a'imma commenting back and forth, then over time what ends up happening is that these disciplines become very refined. And all of the ulum went through this process. They went through the process of refinement. In the beginning, they were all over the place. And slowly, because ulama came generation upon generation, century upon centuries, that did tanqih of these ulum. They refined these ulum. They refined the definitions. They refined the terms. They refined the methodology of presenting the ilm, organizing the ilm, teaching the ilm, and so on and so forth. And it kept on happening again and again, back and forth, until eventually these ulum became very refined. So it's these types of nikat and mubahathat, it's these types of discussions that open the mind towards these ulum. وَيَزُولُ كَثِيرٌ مِنَ الْغَفَلَاتِ وَالْأَوْهَامِ. And many of the misunderstandings and mistakes even possibly, right? The zallat, all of it goes away because of these munaqashat, these types of discussions. لكن يبقى ما سوى هذا الكثير وقد ينشأ من هذه التنقيحات أوهام أخرى. طيب. Then he's like, but the problem is, sometimes with these tanqihat, there are further questions that arise and further problems that are created in the ulum, in the disciplines. وهكذا يبقى مجال التصحيح والاستدراك مفتوحا. يا سلام. هذا أيضا كلام يكتب بماء ذهب يا أحباب. What is Sheikh Muhammad Awama saying over here? حفظه الله تعالى. وهكذا نعم يبقى مجال التصحيح والاستدراك مفتوحا. He says, in this manner, the area of at-tasheeh and al-istidrak. What is at-tasheeh? At-tasheeh means clarifying and rectifying something that was previously mentioned. Al-istidrak meaning questioning, like, maybe was it this way, or this has this issue in it, this has this problem in it. If we mentioned it this matter, then we're going to arrive at this issue, and so on and so forth. This door, this process remains open. And this in no way is a lack of adab towards the imam before us. In no way is it jur'ah upon ilm. This is nafsul ilm. This is what talabul ilm is. This is what studying means. To be able to engage in these discussions with adab. Recognizing your limits, recognizing your place, while at the same time trying to genuinely understand what is being said, as opposed to simply just in a dogmatic manner or in a very parroting manner, just mimicking what is mentioned before you, and completely blind following what was mentioned before you. Trying to understand, trying to digest, trying to become one with the ilm. This is what the process of talab al-ilm is. He says, وَيَبْقَى حَقُّ الْعِلْمِ وَكَرَامَتُهُ يُطَالِبُ بِالْبَحْثِ. نعم. ويبقى حق العلم وكرامته يطالب بالبحث والدأب كل غيور. يطالب بالبحث والدأب كل غيور. He says, likewise, the right of ilm, the nobility of ilm, continues to attract every single person that has ghayra upon that ilm, every single person that has a degree of attachment to it, that they want to continuously research it. He says, وَمَيْدَانُ الْعِلْمِ رَحَبٌ كَحَلْبَةِ السَّبَّاقِ وَهَذِهِ مُهِمَّةُ كُلِّ لَاحِقٍ عَلَى مَعَ كُلِّ سَابِقٍ. This is what we find in every generation. Every generation, the following generation comes and they do istidrak in a muta'addim manner upon the previous generation, and so on and so forth. Then he says, وَالرُّكْنُ الرَّكِينُ لِسَدِّ هَذِهِ الثَّغْرَاتِ وَكُلِّ ثَغْرَةٍ هُوَ مُرَاجَعَةُ النُّصُوصِ وَالنُّقُولِ مِنْ مَصَادِرِهَا الْأُولَى ثُمَّ التَّثَبُّتُ مِنَ النَّقْلِ بمراجعته من أعمال الأصل وما بينهما من مغايرات المهمة أو غير المهمة وكم ينكشف بهذه المراجعات والمقابلات من أوهام وإثبات في حقائق علمية. يا سلام. So important. This is what is the default, what is the most important foundational principle when it comes to filling all of these gaps and holes is, number one, going back to the main primary sources and then making sure that the naql is done properly. So many times what happens, ahbab, is fulan says something, then it's misrepresented because someone might have misunderstood it and they might have passed it forward in a different manner, and then so on and so forth. And the entire discussion is actually changed over time simply because it was misrepresented or misunderstood in one generation. This happens so often. So how do we fix this? We make sure that we go back to the primary sources. We try and find out where every single statement is coming from and why that statement occurred, and so on and so forth. He says, لكن لهذا الركن الركين عمادان يسبقانه أولهما تلقي العلم عن أهله مع الفهم والتثبت وثانيهما الاشتغال بتدريسه سنوات عديدة. يا سلام. ليصل القائم بعد ذلك بتحقيقه إلى ما في عقول الطلبة من غوامض ووقفات فيه فتكون كتاباته وخدماته لهذا العلم هادفة لا عائمة يشرح بها ما عرفه مما علق ويعلق بأذهان الطلبة من مشكلات. He says there are two in order for this to be attained, though, there are two main pillars that have to be there. The first one is taking ilm from the people of ilm. As a student has to be very careful as to who he studies from, because the teacher, his approach and his methodology and his grounded nature in that science and his feeling towards that ilm and his entire, like, you can call it like a vibe, right? The teacher's vibe rubs off on the student. The teachers that are muta'addib, the teachers that are mutakhashshi', the teachers that are careful of how they speak, the teachers that are considerate, the teachers that are, understanding, their nature will rub off on their students. And the teachers that are very rough and tough and, harsh and so on and so forth, that also rubs off on the students. Actually, initially studying, I used to always debate. Like, whenever I wouldn't get something, I would debate. I would argue. And I used to get heated in my arguing. Like, I wasn't a normal, like, I wasn't just argue, I'd get heated, like really passionate. And now sometimes when people who knew me before, sometimes they meet me, they're like, okay, how do you change? Like, you're not really as passionate or as heated anymore. And the simple answer to this, Ahbab, is my teachers in Medina. That's the one reason why it happened. Because when you see ulama that are very knowledgeable and they've spent their entire life on these ulum, and yet they're so reserved in holding opinions and in, rushing to conclusions and possibly labeling people or bashing people and X, Y, and Z. They're just reserved. They don't do that. And it rubs off on you. If you're studying with them, it will rub off on you. And the opposite as well. When you see teachers, for example, if, like, let's say, for example, there's a sheikh when he's teaching and, 90% of what he's telling you is Fulan is, this is what's wrong with Fulan, this is what's wrong with Fulan, this is what's wrong with Fulan, this is what's wrong with Fulan. Then your entire manhaj, your entire personality, your entire tabi'ah, your entire religion is going to be Fulan is wrong, Fulan is wrong, Fulan is wrong, Fulan is wrong. And that's it. That's all you're going to be thinking. They're all wrong. Everyone's wrong. That's what your mindset becomes. But if when you are consistently not focusing on what's wrong and only what's right, and then after that, by focusing on what's right, you automatically know what's wrong. There's two ways of saying the same thing, right? Focus on what's right as opposed to focusing on what's wrong. And also with adab, even if you're going to mention the stuff which is wrong, mention it with adab, mention it with respect. No, so that's why he says it's important to take ilm from the people of ilm مع الفهم والتثبت while gaining proper understanding of the concepts. That's number one. Number two, before a person embarks on this, questioning that, oh, I think this is the way it should be, and these are my opinions, and this is my understanding, and this is my refined understanding. Before any of that, al-ishtighal bitadrīsihi sanawat adida. The individual should actually teach these ulum for a number of years before he ends up arriving at his own conclusions. Why? Because the amount of years, if he spends on an amount of years teaching these ulum, what he's developing is, this happens so often where you might have an ishkal, or there's something that's presented, for example, in the text, and you have an ishkal towards it, you don't agree with it, you have an issue with it. And so you present that issue. And then you yourself are able to come up with an answer. Okay. And you find like that answer to be sufficient. So you're fine with your answer. But then after some time, you yourself have an issue with your answer. Then you present it again and you think, no, there has to be a better way of understanding this. And then you refine your understanding again. And this happens again and again. So what is this process of continuously refining even your own understanding? This comes with teaching the ulum for a number of years. When you this is after studying, after you finish studying and you start teaching, and you continuously go through the content again and again. And what ends up happening is that individual develops a very strong understanding regarding those matters. And then when he's able to, do tahqiq and he arrives at a conclusion, or he, debates a concept and a topic, then it comes off as very, well researched and thoroughly thought through. Now, then he says, number 10, وهاتان الفقرتان, right, regarding 8 and 9, the previous paragraphs. أو قل هاتان الخدمتان هما عماد علمي في خدمة هذا الكتاب الحافل الجامع. أما ما يخص الفقرة الثامنة فإني رأيت عمدة الشارح ومحط رحله هذه الكتب وأصحابها عمد هذه العلوم في هذه الحقبة الزمنية. فوقفت عندها أو كدت أقف ولم أتجاوزها معتمدا عليها إلا نادرا كفتح المغيث أو لتخريج نقل عنها ككتاب ابن الجماعة أو الطيبي أو التبريزي الأردبيلي، فالنفس الحديثي الناقد غير واضح في هذه الكتب الثلاثة والله أعلم. طيب, he says in his work, because the author primarily relied upon the books that he previously mentioned, these are the books that he's also referencing, and rarely does he go beyond this. Sometimes he might go to Fath al-Mughith, because again, Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala did not base his work Tadrīb al-Rāwī upon Fath al-Mughith. Sakhawi was his contemporary, and likewise the other books that he mentioned over here, he rarely goes towards these other books. أما ما يخص الفقرة التاسعة فإني أرجع إلى مصادر أقوالهم وأتثبت من عزوهم ونقولهم وأدرس ما بين مؤدى نقلهم والأصل فيه وأنبه على ما فيه إن كان وكان من جراء ذلك تحرير وتصويب لنقول كثيرة يجدها القارئ إن شاء الله في التعليق. He says, as for the ninth paragraph that he mentioned, he says he also tried to do that to make sure that the references are correct. So he always went to the primary sources. If, for example, Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala says Fulan says so and so, like where do we find the qawl of Fulan? Let's find out where Suyuti got this from. Let's go to the primary sources that he was referencing and the books that he was going back to and see where he got this, quotation of Fulan from. And so on and so forth. Shaykh Muhammad Awama is telling us that there's a lot of nuqul that he was able to fix because he found them to be inconsistent at times. He says, وكان أمر آخر هو أن هذه الخدمة للتدريب كان فيها خدمة كبيرة لمصادره المذكورة. He said, by way of this, we were able to achieve another benefit too, which is that while I was studying Tadrīb and I was benefiting Tadrīb and we were working on Tadrīb, Shaykh Muhammad Awami is saying, we were also able to serve the previous or the other sources that were mentioned as the sources that Imam Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala in his Tadrīb was relying on. طيب, number 11 he goes on. He says, يضاف إلى نتائج هذه الخدمة على هذا السنن تصحيح القول بمسائل الصلاحية مأخوذة بالتسليم والتوارد من قائليها. تبين أن الأمر ليس كذلك كالزعم المشهور على ابن الصلاح أنه لا يجيز لأهل عصره فمن بعدهم التصحيح ونحوه تحسين والتضعيف وتفسير قول الحاكم الحديث على شرطهما أي روى الشيخان لرجاله احتجاجا ومسألة اللقاء بين الراوي وشيخه المشهورة بين مسلم وشيوخه وكنقل الحافظ ابن حجر على اتفاق العلماء على أنه لا يجوز العمل بالحديث الشديد الضعيف وضعف وما إلى ذلك وهو كثير. He says there's a lot of other masail which were incorrectly or wrongfully attributed towards the ones that held those opinions, and we clarified and we elaborated on them. And then he gave a number of examples like this. He says the dominant opinion or the majority held understanding, which is that Ibn Salah rahimahullah ta'ala used to say that the people of his time can no longer do tasheeh, tahseen and tad'if. And likewise al-Hakim, when he used to say al-Hadīth ala shartihima, like what does he intend by that? And the whole mas'ala of al-liqa, shart al-liqa ithbat al-sihha between Imam Muslim and his shuyukh that he mentions in his muqaddimah. All of these masail will come inshallah ta'ala, and the Shaykh Muhammad Awama is saying that he further elaborated on all of these. And sometimes you were able to find masail that were misunderstood for centuries simply because the nuqul, meaning who they were referencing and so on and so forth, there was some sort of a misunderstanding over there. طيب, he says وهاتان الخدمتان تخريج النقول من مصادرها ودراستها ثم تصحيح ما تورد عليه وأخذ بالتسليم هو الذي سوغ لي أن أجعل خدمتي لتدريب شرحا وتحريرا. He says because I was focused on these two things, that's why it ended up becoming so large. You'll look and find that the majority of the other prints of Tadrīb al-Rāwī, they're like in 2 volumes, 2-3 volumes maximum. But this print is 5 volumes. Why? Because he added so much more content. May Allah reward him in his work. طيب, then he says والذي حملني على هذا التطويل في نظر بعض القراء أمور أولها أداء العلم حقه. طيب, why did I make it so long? He says, number 1, I wanted to fulfill the right of ilm. وهو المنهج الذي نشأنا عليه علماؤنا السابقون واللاحقون وأشياخنا رضي الله عنهم. فترى الاستدراكات في كتاباتهم وإحقاق الحق في مباحثاتهم تملأ صحفهم مع الأدب وإعطاء كل ذي حق حقه. He said that is the manhaj that we found our teachers up. ثانيها أن هذا الكتاب مرجع مهم للباحثين المصنفين المدرسين لا يستغني عنه رجال هذه الطبقة. Number 2, it is a very important primary source for any researcher in the ulum al-hadith, this work. So we wanted to make sure that the work was served in the way that the work deserves to be served. ثالثها أنه كتاب لا يزال مقررا دراسيا في المراحل العليا في كثير من المراكز العلمية والجامعات. The number 3 is that this book remains a very important marja. It remains a very important core text which is being taught in many of the marakis, many of the Islamic institutions, on a high level for students to master the sciences of hadith. So these are the reasons why Sheikh Muhammad Awama wanted to focus on making sure that he fulfilled the right to the fullest capacity, and why the book became very long, and why he added so many matters of sharh and tahrir and so on and so forth. And in reality, there's so much benefit that falls in, or that Sheikh Muhammad Awama has added in his footnotes, something that no student of hadith should ever overlook, especially because of simply the amount of time he spent with it. There are more discussions over here. We'll continue this bi'idhnillahi ta'ala in the next lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.